Sarah Martinez had always been careful about her words, but tonight her tongue had loosened after 3 beers at Murphy's bar. The conversation had started innocently enough when a group of college kids began bragging about their fraternity hazing rituals, comparing them to military training they'd seen in movies. "You kids have no idea what real training looks like," Sarah had muttered, swirling her beer. One of the young men, sporting a backwards baseball cap and an attitude to match, turned to her with a smirk. "Oh yeah, and what would you know about it, lady?" Sarah's eyes flashed. She was tired of being underestimated, tired of people assuming that because she was a 32-year-old woman working as a night shift security guard, she knew nothing about the world. "I know plenty. I was a Navy SEAL for 8 years. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. The entire bar seemed to quiet down, conversations stopping mid-sentence as heads turned toward their corner booth. Sarah immediately realized her mistake, but it was too late to take it back. The college kid laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "A female Navy SEAL? Right, and I'm the Queen of England." His friends joined in the laughter, and soon half the bar was snickering. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She had never claimed to be a SEAL before, had never even thought about making such a claim. The lie had just slipped out in a moment of frustration and wounded pride. But now, with everyone starring and laughing, she couldn't bring herself to admit the truth. "Believe what you want," she said, throwing a $20 bill on the table and standing to leave. But the damage was already done. In today's world of smartphones and social media, nothing stayed secret for long. By the time Sarah got home to her small apartment, someone had already posted a video of the exchange on Tik. The caption read, "Woman at local bar claims to be Navy SEAL fake." Sarah watched the video 3 times, her stomach sinking deeper with each viewing. She looked tired in the footage, older than her 32 years, and the way she'd said it made it sound like she was desperately trying to impress people, which she supposed she had been. The video gained traction overnight. By morning, it had been shared hundreds of times, and by afternoon, local news stations had picked up the story. Sarah called in sick to work, unable to face the world after seeing herself on the morning news with the headline, "Local Woman Falsely Claims Military Service." She spent the day hiding in her apartment, watching as the story grew bigger and more distorted with each retelling. Comments poured in from angry veterans and military families, calling her everything from disgraceful to much worse. Death threats filled her inbox. Someone had already identified her full name and workplace. 3 days later, Sarah was restocking supplies in the lobby of the office building where she worked when she heard heavy footsteps behind her. She turned to see 2 military police officers in dress uniforms approaching her station. "Sarah Martinez?" asked the taller officer, his face stern and official. Sarah's throat went dry. "Yes, that's me." "Ma'am, you're under arrest for violating federal law regarding stolen valor. You have the right to remain silent." The words echoed in her head as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The few office workers who were still in the building at that late hour stopped to stare as she was led out in custody. Someone held up their phone, recording her walk of shame. The ride to the military police station was silent except for the radio chatter. Sarah stared out the window at the familiar streets of her, wondering how a single moment of stupidity had destroyed her life so completely. She thought about calling her mother, but what would she say? How could she explain that she'd thrown away everything over a lie told in a moment of wounded pride? At the station, they processed her like any other criminal. Fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings confiscated. The holding cell was small and cold, with nothing but a metal bench and a toilet that had seen better days. Sarah sat on the bench and put her head in her hands, trying to process what was happening to her. Hours passed before a military attorney came to see her. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who introduced himself as Captain. He sat across from her in the small interview room and opened a thick folder. "Ms. Martinez, I'm going to be straight with you," he said. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. The video has gone viral, and there are dozens of witnesses who heard you claim to be a Navy SEAL. Under the Stolen Valor Act, false claims about military service, especially elite units like the SEALs, can result in significant fines and up to a year in prison." Sarah nodded numbly. "I know I messed up. It was stupid. I was angry and embarrassed, and I said something I shouldn't have said. I never meant for any of this to happen." "The prosecutor is taking this case very seriously," Captain continued. There's a lot of public pressure to make an example of cases like this. However, I noticed something unusual in your file. He pulled out a sheet of paper and studied it carefully. You have no prior criminal record. You've worked steady jobs for the past 10 years. Your employment records show you're reliable and trustworthy, but there's something else that's interesting. Sarah looked up at him, hopping for any sign of good news. Your birth records show you were born on a military base overseas. Your father was stationed there at the time. Do you remember anything about your childhood on military bases? Sarah shrugged. Not really. My parents divorced when I was young and my mom moved us back to the States. My dad wasn't really in the picture after that. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. Captain made some notes. The judge assigned to your case is Admiral. She's retired Navy, very respected, but also very tough on stolen valor cases. Your hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. That night, Sarah lay on the narrow bunk in her cell, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how her life had spiraled so completely out of control. She thought about her job, which she would certainly lose now. She thought about her apartment, which she wouldn't be able to afford without income. She thought about her mother, who would be devastated when she found out what had happened. But mostly, she thought about her father, whom she hadn't seen or spoken to in over 15 years. She had vague memories of him in uniform, of living on different military bases when she was very young. Her mother had always been bitter about the divorce and rarely talked about that part of their lives. Sarah wondered what he would think if he knew what she had done. The next morning, Sarah was transported to the courthouse in shackles. The media had caught wind of the story, and camera crews waited outside the building. She kept her head down as she was led through the crowd of reporters shouting questions. The courtroom was packed with people, many of them wearing military uniforms or veteran organization shirts. Sarah could feel their angry stares burning into her back as she sat at the defendant's table next to Captain. Admiral entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who had commanded respect her entire life. She was a tall woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to see everything. The room fell completely silent as she took her seat at the bench. "This court is now in session," she announced in a voice that carried authority. "We are here today to address the charges against Ms. Sarah Martinez regarding violations of the Stolen Valor Act." The prosecutor, a sharp-faced man in his 40s, stood and began laying out the case against Sarah. He played the video from the bar, read statements from witnesses, and presented evidence of the damage her false claims had caused to military morale and public trust. "Your Honor, this defendant willfully and deliberately claimed to have served as a Navy SEAL, one of our military's most elite and respected units. She made this claim in a public setting, knowing it was false, in order to gain respect and admiration she had not earned. This is exactly the type of behavior the Stolen Valor Act was designed to punish." Sarah felt smaller and smaller as the evidence mounted against her. Every word the prosecutor spoke was true. She had lied, and now she was facing the consequences. When it came time for her defense, Captain stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, my client does not dispute the basic facts of this case. She made a false claim about military service, and she regrets it deeply. However, I would ask the court to consider the circumstances that led to this moment of poor judgment." He went on to describe Sarah's background, her steady work history, her lack of any prior criminal behavior. He painted a picture of a woman who had made one terrible mistake in a moment of wounded pride and was now paying a price far beyond what the crime deserved. Admiral listened carefully to both sides, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When the arguments were finished, she sat back in her chair and studied Sarah for a long moment. "Ms. Martinez, please stand," she said finally. Sarah rose on unsteady legs, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Do you have anything you would like to say to this court before I render my decision?" Sarah's mouth was dry as sand, but she knew this might be her only chance to explain herself. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. There's no excuse for it. I was angry and embarrassed, and I said something stupid without thinking about the consequences. I never meant to dishonor anyone who actually served. I respect our military and our veterans, and I'm deeply sorry for any pain I've caused them or their families." Admiral nodded slowly. "Ms. Martinez, stolen valor is a serious offense that strikes at the heart of military honor and sacrifice. The men and women who earn the right to call themselves Navy SEALs have endured some of the most rigorous training and dangerous missions our military has to offer. Many have died in service to their country. For someone to falsely claim such honors is deeply offensive to every person who has worn the uniform. Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. This was it. Her life was about to be ruined forever. But then Admiral did something unexpected. She stood up from her bench and walked down to stand directly in front of Sarah. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "However," the Admiral continued, "before I pass sentence, I need to ask you about something. Would you please roll up your left sleeve?" Sarah looked confused, but rolling up the sleeve of her orange jumpsuit to reveal her forearm. Admiral leaned in closer, studying something on Sarah's arm. Her expression changed completely, the stern mask of authority melting away to reveal something that looked almost like shock. "Where did you get that tattoo?" she asked quietly. Sarah looked down at her left forearm, where a small, intricate tattoo of an eagle holding a trident was partially visible. She had gotten it so long ago that she rarely thought about it anymore. I've had it since I was 18, Sarah said. "I'm not really sure why I got it, I just liked the design." Admiral stared at the tattoo for several more seconds, then looked up into Sarah's eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, everyone could hear her words clearly. "That tattoo's real." Courtroom erupted into confused murmurs as Admiral's words hung in the air. Sarah stared at her own tattoo, trying to understand what was happening. The small eagle and trident design had been part of her for so long that she barely noticed it anymore, like a birthmark or a scar from childhood. "Your Honor, I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice barely audible above the growing chatter in the courtroom. Admiral held up her hand for silence, and the room immediately quieted. Her expression had completely transformed from stern judge to something Sarah couldn't quite identify: shock, recognition, and perhaps even a hint of excitement. "Bailiff, please clear the courtroom of all media and spectators. This proceeding is now classified," Admiral ordered. The bailiff looked confused but began ushering people out. Reporters protested loudly, demanding to know what was happening, but they were firmly escorted from the room. Within minutes, only Sarah, Captain, the prosecutor, court personnel, and Admiral remained. "Ms. Martinez, I need you to tell me everything you remember about getting that tattoo," Admiral said, sitting back down but leaning forward intently. Sarah's mind raced, trying to remember details from 14 years ago. "I was 18, just graduated high school. My mom and I were going through a rough patch, fighting a lot. I was angry about something, I can't remember what, and I went to a tattoo parlor downtown. The artist showed me a bunch of designs, but this one just spoke to me somehow. I couldn't afford anything elaborate, and this one was small and simple." "Do you remember the name of the tattoo parlor?" "Ink Masters, I think. It's not there anymore. Closed down years ago." Admiral turned to her clerk. "I need you to contact Naval Special Warfare Command immediately. Tell them Admiral needs to speak with Captain James Harrison about Operation Nightingale. Use my personal authorization code Alpha 77. The clerk nodded and stepped out to make the call. Captain stood up. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I'm completely lost here. My client is charged with stolen valor, and now we're talking about classified operations." Admiral studied Sarah's face carefully before responding. "Captain, that tattoo is not something you can just walk into a parlor and get. It's a specific design used by a highly classified Navy unit that hasn't existed since 2007. The fact that your client has it, and has had it for 14 years, raises some very serious questions." Sarah felt like she was in a dream or perhaps a nightmare. Nothing made sense anymore. "I don't understand any of this. I just picked a design I liked. How could it be classified?" "Because, Ms. Martinez, that exact design was the unofficial symbol of a unit called Shadow Team 7. It was a deep black operations unit that officially never existed. Only 17 people in the entire world have that tattoo, and according to my knowledge, all of them are accounted for." The door opened and the clerk returned. "Your Honor, Captain Harrison is on a secure line." Admiral picked up the phone. "Captain Harrison, this is Admiral. I need you to look at the roster for Shadow Team 7, specifically any female operatives." "Yes, I'll wait." The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. "Are you sure?" Admiral said into the phone. "Martinez, born March 15, 1993, Yes, that matches, and the tattoo was part of the initiation. I understand. Yes, send everything you have to my secure terminal immediately. She hung up the phone and stared at Sarah with an expression of complete amazement. Ms. Martinez, according to Captain Harrison, Martinez was inducted into Shadow Team 7 in 2011 at age 18. She completed the full training program and served for 6 months before the unit was disbanded. Her memory was supposedly wiped using experimental procedures developed by DARPA. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. That's impossible. I would remember something like that. The memory suppression program was called Project Rasa. It was designed to protect deep cover operatives by completely erasing their memories of classified operations. According to Harrison, you were one of the test subjects. Captain sat down heavily. Your Honor, are you telling me that my client actually was a Navy SEAL? Not exactly, Admiral replied. Shadow Team 7 was beyond SEALs. It was a special access program that recruited individuals with specific psychological and physical profiles for operations that couldn't leave any trace. The members weren't technically SEALs, but they went through training that made SEAL training look like summer camp. Sarah's legs felt weak and she grabbed the table for support. Fragmented images flashed through her mind: dark rooms, obstacle courses, the smell of gunpowder. Were these memories, or was she just imagining things because of what she was hearing? I need to sit down, Sarah said. Admiral nodded to the bailiff, who brought a chair. As Sarah sat, the Admiral continued reading from her computer screen. According to this file, Martinez was selected for the program through a complex algorithm that identified individuals with specific traits: high stress tolerance, low emotional attachment to civilian life, exceptional physical capabilities, and interestingly, a family history of military service. My father, Sarah whispered. Your father was Colonel Martinez, Special Operations Command. He was killed in Afghanistan in 2012, which was actually after your supposed memory wipe. That might explain why the suppression wasn't complete. Significant emotional trauma can sometimes break through the conditioning. Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. My father is dead. Admiral's expression softened. I'm sorry, Ms. Martinez. According to this file, he died in a classified operation. Your mother was told he died in a training accident to protect operational security. The room fell silent as Sarah processed this information. Her father, whom she'd resented for years for abandoning them, had actually been killed serving his country. And somehow, she had followed in his footsteps without even knowing it. There's more, Admiral continued. The file indicates that during your time with Shadow Team 7, you completed several high-value target extractions in Syria and Afghanistan. You were apparently quite exceptional at your job. Captain cleared his throat. Your Honor, assuming all of this is true, where does that leave us legally? Is my client still charged with stolen valor if she actually did serve? Admiral was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the unprecedented situation. Technically, she claimed to be a Navy SEAL, which she wasn't, but she did serve in a unit that was arguably more elite than the SEALs. The question is whether claiming to be something slightly different from what you actually were constitutes stolen valor. The prosecutor, who had been silent throughout this surreal turn of events, finally spoke up. Your Honor, with respect, this is all very convenient. How do we know this isn't an elaborate hoax? Memory suppression, secret military units. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. Admiral turned to him with a withering stare. Mr. Collins, I have been in the Navy for 35 years. I have clearance levels you've never heard of. The documents I'm looking at right now are authenticated with cryptographic signatures that would be impossible to forge. This is not a hoax. Sarah's mind was reeling, trying to process everything she'd heard. If this is all true, why can't I remember any of it? The memory suppression was designed to be complete, Admiral explained. But trauma, stress, or certain triggers can sometimes cause fragments to surface. The fact that you subconsciously chose to get that specific tattoo suggests that some part of your mind retained the memories. As if summoned by her words, more images flashed through Sarah's consciousness. She remembered cold water, diving at night, the weight of equipment on her back. She remembered firing ranges and hand-to-hand combat training. Most clearly, she remembered a sense of purpose and belonging that she'd been searching for ever since without knowing why. I remember diving, Sarah said slowly. cold water at night, and there was a man with a beard who taught us to fight with knives. Admiral consulted her screen again. That would be Chief Petty Officer. He was the hand-to-hand combat instructor for Shadow Team 7. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, though she wasn't sure if they were tears of relief, grief, or overwhelming confusion. Her entire understanding of her own life had just been turned upside down. "So what happens now?" Captain asked. Admiral closed the laptop and looked at Sarah with a mixture of sympathy and respect. "Now, Ms. Martinez, we need to figure out how much of your memory can be safely restored. The suppression protocols were experimental, and revering them carries risks, but you have the right to know who you really are." She turned to the prosecutor. "Mr. Collins, I'm dismissing all charges against Ms. Martinez. She may not have been a Navy SEAL in the traditional sense, but her service record shows she earned the right to be proud of her military service. What happened at that bar was not stolen valor. It was a confused woman trying to remember who she used to be." The prosecutor looked like he wanted to argue, but he simply nodded and gathered his papers. Admiral stood up. "Ms. Martinez, I'm going to arrange for you to meet with some people who can help you understand what happened to you. Captain Harrison is flying in from Virginia, and there's a psychiatrist who specializes in recovered memories. They'll be here tomorrow." Sarah stood up on shaky legs. "Admiral, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you recognize the tattoo? Are you part of this Shadow Team thing too?" Admiral smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. "No, Ms. Martinez, but I was the Admiral who signed the authorization for Shadow Team 7 to be created. I knew every member of that unit by name, including you. I've been wondering for 12 years what happened to Martinez. I never expected to find her in my courtroom on stolen valor charges." As Sarah was led out of the courthouse, no longer in handcuffs, she felt like she was walking through someone else's life. The reporters were gone, having been escorted away during the classified portion of the hearing. The few people remaining in the hallways looked at her with curiosity rather than contempt. Captain walked beside her. "Sarah, I've been practicing military law for 15 years and I've never seen anything like this. Are you okay?" Sarah considered the question. Was she okay? She'd spent the last 3 days thinking her life was over, only to discover that she'd actually lived a completely different life that she couldn't remember. Her father was dead. She'd apparently been some kind of super soldier, and her memories had been deliberately erased by her own government. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Ask me again tomorrow." Safe House was nothing like what Sarah had expected. Instead of a dark, windowless bunker, it was a comfortable ranch-style home in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside the city. Captain Harrison had explained that they used ordinary-looking locations specifically to avoid drawing attention from neighbors or... Sarah sat in the living room, sipping coffee and studying the faces of the 3 people who claimed to know her better than she knew herself. Captain Harrison was a tall, lean man in his 50s with graying hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. Dr. Sarah was the memory specialist Admiral had mentioned, a petite woman with kind eyes who spoke in soft, measured tones. The third person was the biggest surprise of all. "You really don't remember me, do you?" asked Maria Santos, a woman about Sarah's age with short dark hair and calloused hands that suggested she'd never stopped training. "We were roommates during Shadow Team training. You saved my life in Syria." Sarah studied Maria's face, searching for any spark of recognition. There was something familiar about her smile, something that felt safe and comfortable, but no concrete memories surfaced. "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "It's like looking at pictures of someone else's life." Doctor leaned forward. "That's actually a good sign, Sarah. The fact that you feel familiarity suggests the memories weren't completely destroyed, just suppressed. The mind finds ways to preserve important connections, even when the conscious memories are blocked." Captain Harrison spread several files across the coffee table. "Sarah, before we begin any memory recovery procedures, you need to understand what you're choosing. Some of what you'll remember won't be pleasant. Shadow Team operations weren't training exercises or humanitarian missions. You did things that were necessary for national security, but they took a toll on everyone involved." Sarah picked up one of the files and opened it. Inside were photographs of a woman who looked exactly like her, but stronger somehow, more confident. The woman in the photos wore tactical gear and carried weapons with casual expertise. In one image, she was rappelling down the side of a building. In another, she was emerging from dark water onto a beach at night. "That's me," Sarah asked. "That's you," Maria confirmed. "You were the best natural shooter I ever saw, and you could hold your breath underwater longer than anyone except maybe our dive instructor." More fragments flickered through Sarah's consciousness. The weight of diving gear, the taste of salt water, the controlled breathing techniques that still came naturally to her during stressful moments. She realized she'd been using military breathing exercises for years without knowing why. Doctor opened her laptop. "Sarah, memory recovery isn't like flipping a switch. It's more like excavating an archaeological site. We have to be careful not to damage what we're trying to uncover. I'm going to show you some images and sounds that were part of your training. They might trigger some memories." The first image was of a diving platform at night. Sarah felt a jolt of recognition so strong it was almost physical. "I know this place," she said immediately. "There's a rocky outcropping about 50 meters to the left, and the water is always cold, even in summer." Captain Harrison nodded approvingly. "That's the training facility off the coast of Virginia. You did your final dive qualification there." Doctor showed more images: a firing range, a hand-to-hand combat training room, the interior of a military aircraft. With each picture, more memories began to surface, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. Sarah remembered the weight of a rifle in her hands, the satisfaction of hitting targets at impossible distances. She remembered learning to move silently through buildings, to appear and disappear like a ghost. Most clearly, she remembered the people, her teammates who had become like family. "What happened to the others?" Sarah asked. "You said there were 17 people with this tattoo." Maria's expression darkened. Some stayed in the military and were reassigned to other units. Some left and became contractors. A few, she paused, struggling with the words. A few didn't make it through the memory suppression process. "What do you mean?" Captain Harrison answered. "The experimental nature of Project Rasa meant there were risks. Some subjects experienced severe psychological trauma during the process. 3 members of Shadow Team 7 suffered complete mental breakdowns. One committed suicide 6 months after the procedure." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "And you want to reverse this process?" Doctor spoke up quickly. "The recovery process is much safer than the original suppression. We've learned a lot in the past 12 years about how memory works. And in your case, the suppression was clearly incomplete to begin with. We're not forcing buried memories to the surface. We're helping memories that are already trying to emerge." As if to prove her point, another wave of recollections washed over Sarah. She remembered her first mission infiltrating a compound in Afghanistan to extract a captured CIA operative. She remembered the careful planning, the night insertion, the moment of pure terror when everything went wrong and they had to fight their way out. But she also remembered the pride she'd felt when they succeeded, when the operative was safely returned to his family. She remembered feeling like she was part of something important, something that mattered. "I want to know," Sarah said finally. "I want to remember everything." Over the next 3 hours, Doctor guided Sarah through a careful process of memory recovery. It wasn't like hypnosis or some dramatic movie scene. Instead, it was more like having a conversation with someone who helped her connect dots she hadn't realized were related. The memories came back in waves, each one triggering others. Sarah remembered her recruitment approached on her 18th birthday by a man who seemed to know everything about her life and offered her a chance to serve her country in a way that few people ever could. She remembered the brutal 6-month training program that pushed her beyond every limit she thought she had. Physical training that made her stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. Mental conditioning that taught her to function under stress that would break most people. Weapons training that turned her into a precise, lethal instrument. But she also remembered the camaraderie, the sense of belonging to something greater than herself. For the first time in her life, she'd felt truly useful, truly valued for who she was rather than judged for who she wasn't. "Why was my memory suppressed?" Sarah asked. "If I was so good at this, why not just reassign me to another unit?" Captain Harrison sighed deeply. "Politics, mostly. Shadow Team 7 was created under a specific administration with specific goals. When the political winds shifted, certain people in Washington decided that units like ours were too dangerous to exist. The official reason was that we knew too much sensitive information to be allowed to return to civilian life normally." "But the real reason," Maria added bitterly, was that some senator was worried about political liability if any of our operations ever became public. It was easier to make us disappear than to take responsibility for what they'd asked us to do. Sarah felt a surge of anger unlike anything she'd experienced in years. It was clean and focused, the kind of anger that could be channeled into action rather than destructive fury. So they just erased us, threw away our service like it never mattered. Not all of us, Captain Harrison said. Some of us fought the suppression order through legal channels. A few managed to get reassigned before the program was shut down. But you, Maria, and several others were deemed high risk because of your psychological profiles. High risk how? Maria smiled grimly. We were too good at our jobs and too independent in our thinking. They were worried we might go rogue if we disagreed with policy decisions. As more memories returned, Sarah began to understand why she'd felt so lost for the past 12 years. She'd been living with a constant sense that something was missing, that she was meant for something more than security guard shifts and lonely nights in a studio apartment. Now she knew what that something was. What happens now? Sarah asked. I can't exactly go back to my old job after this. Captain Harrison smiled for the first time since she'd met him. Actually, Sarah, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Shadow Team 7 may be gone, but the need for people with your skills hasn't disappeared. There are several government agencies that would be very interested in recruiting someone with your background and abilities. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance to continue serving your country, this time with full knowledge of what you're doing and why. The CIA has a special activities division that could use someone with your talents. The FBI has counterterrorism units that need people who can operate in environments where regular agents can't go. Even some private contractors working with the State Department have positions that would be perfect for your skill set. Sarah looked at Maria. What did you do after you got your memories back? I work for a private security company now. We do executive protection for diplomats in high-threat areas. It's not the same as shadow teamwork, but it's meaningful. And more importantly, I remember who I am again. Doctor began packing up her equipment. Sarah, I want to see you again next week. Memory recovery is an ongoing process, and you may continue to remember new things for months or even years. There's also the emotional component to consider. You're essentially grieving for 12 lost years of your life. As the afternoon turned to evening, Sarah found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since the incredible revelations had begun. She walked out to the backyard of the safe house and looked up at the stars, feeling more like herself than she had in over a decade. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her mother, whom she'd called earlier to explain that she was okay and would visit soon to explain everything. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I always knew you were meant for something special. Sarah realized that her mother had probably known more than she'd let on about Sarah's military service. The thought should have made her angry, but instead, she felt grateful. Her mother had protected her when she couldn't protect herself. 3 months later, Sarah stood in front of a bathroom mirror in her new apartment in Washington, D.C., getting ready for her first day at her new job with the CIA's Special Activities Center. She looked at the tattoo on her forearm, the eagle and trident that had saved her life and restored her identity. The phone rang, and she saw Admiral's name on the caller ID. Good morning, the Admiral said, using her real first name for the first time. I wanted to call and see how you're settling in. It's good, Admiral, strange but good. I feel like I'm finally living my own life again. I have some news that I think will interest you. The Senate Intelligence Committee has opened an investigation into Project Rasa and the termination of Shadow Team 7. Your case has raised some serious questions about the treatment of classified operatives. Sarah smiled. Will there be accountability? There will be justice, Admiral said firmly. The people who made the decision to suppress your memories violated their oath to the people who served under their command. They won't escape the consequences forever. After hanging up, Sarah finished getting ready and headed out into the D.C. morning. As she walked to her new job, she thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. A moment of drunken boasting had led to her arrest, which had led to the discovery of her true identity, which had finally led her home to the life she was meant to live. She thought about the other members of Shadow Team 7 who were still out there, living with suppressed memories and the constant feeling that something was missing from their lives. She hoped that her case would help them find their way back to themselves as well. The guard at the CIA entrance checked her credentials and waved her through. As Sarah walked into the building, she felt the same sense of purpose and belonging that had been missing from her life for 12 years. She was Martinez again, and she was exactly where she belonged. The tattoo on her arm caught the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, the eagle and trident seeming to gleam with quiet pride. It had taken 14 years, but the symbol had finally brought her home.